We're learning this man in the Kollel, HILCHOS KIBUD. We're actually now already in KIBUD. Rabbi, most of the siman in KIBUD speaks about the CHIYUV KIBUD, the CHIYUV Moira for a father and a mother. Towards the end of the siman, there's a few seifim that the Shulchan Aruch speaks about a little bit broader than just KIBUD Aveim. It's not restricted just to the father and the mother. As the Shulchan Aruch brings, it's a Gemara in Ksubis. There's a din of Achicha Agadol. There's a din of Eishes Aviv that is somewhat included in the din of KIBUD Aveim. In today's Shiur, Bais Hashem will focus on actually a din that's zichron in the Gemara, and it's not even in the Shulchan Aruch. It's first the Ramah. The Mechaber doesn't even speak about this din about being Mechaber a grandparent. The Ramah, the one to open up this discussion is the Marik. The Marik from the later Rishonim. In the late 1400s, the Marik had a shaila. Somebody asked him, he wanted to say Kaddish for his grandfather. And it was the minig that only one person says Kaddish in shul, like you find some shuls now as well. Only one person says Kaddish. So the shaila was, if this grandchild could say the Kaddish for his grandfather and be matcha somebody else that's supposed to say Kaddish. So the Barik said that even though we find it's a Gemara in Yevamis, the Gemara says B'nei Vanim, B'nei Badam Areim Kabanim, but often that if somebody's child, Rahman al-Atlan, is nifter, but he has grandchildren, Areim Kabanim, and he's B'kayim, the mitzvah period of Rivya. However, when it comes to the din of being Mechaber, a grandparent, says the Marik, Amari de Galoshin, Loi Matzinu B'shum Makom, we don't find anywhere that is a specific chiyuv to be mechaber a grandparent. You're supposed to be mechaber anybody, and if they're older people, you're supposed to be mechaber them. They're older, but medin kibud av to include also a grandparent. Zok Marik lo matzinu b'shum makom. And the emissaries that already earlier in the Rishonim, the Rambam, Pashtus, that's the Rambam, the Tshuva Me'ava brings this Rambam. The Rambam says that if somebody is Kollel, his grandparent, it's like he's Kollel any person. The Lashon, v'cheina Kollel avi aviv, somebody that's Kollel, who shouts, who curses, a grandparent, harezek Kollel echad meshara kol, it's like he's Kollel any random person. And the Kesef Mishnah over there explains the reason is because the din kibud aveim is not applicable for a grandparent. So we have over here the Shitas Amarik, which is already pashtas befurish like that, and the Rambam, that there's no chiyuv kibud aveim to a grandparent. As oich is mavur later in the El Yezuta, the Marsha Masechta Soita, we'll get to that Gemara, but the Marsha just says clearly that there's a chiyuv of, even though it's b'nei banim areim kabanim, but when it comes to kavod, there's no din kavod. Me'idach, the Ramah by us, the Ramah is machadish, and the Ramah says, the Lashon HaRamah, he actually doesn't say that he's a chiyuv for a grandparent. He says, what he brings the Yesh Oimrim de Marek, and then he says ve'enoi nira li ela de chayiv b'chvoid aviv yoysim ekvoid avi aviv. But often there is a din to be mechaber a grandparent, but it's not as much as being mechaber a parent. Nira li el de chayiv b'chvoid aviv yoysim ekvoid avi aviv. A person is mechaber a grandparent, a grandfather, but it's not as much as being mechabed parents. What's the makor? What's the makor to say that there's a chiyuv to be mechabed grandparents, and also that it's a chiyuv but not as much as parents? So the Taz already brings that the makor is a Rashi al Torah and Parshas Vayigash. It's a Medrash. The Ramah himself and Shuvas Ramah And the Ramah and Darkei Moshe brings it. In the Ramah itself, he doesn't say, though some Shulchan Aruchs have in parentheses after Ramah that the Makor is a Medrash, but the Ramah himself in Tshuva says the Makor is what Rashi says al Torah. When Yaakov, the pasuk says Vayizbach zvachim lekei aviv Yitzchak, and why not Avram? Why did he mention his grandfather? Zokt Rashi, the Chai of Adam b'chvoid aviv yoyser mekvoid zikna. Zokt Rashi, you're supposed to be machabed. Rashi's not even coming to say tonight's meduber that you machabed a grandparent. But Rashi is saying you mechuyev to machabed your parent more than a grandparent. Therefore, Yaakov, when he shechted the pasuk, vayizbach zvachim lekei aviv Yitzchak, and it doesn't even say Avram. Al kaponim is mavur that he's a chiyev to machabed a grandfather, not as much as a father, but he's a chiyev to machabed a grandfather. So what do we have over here? So we have a machloikis. Mechad Gisa the Marik says that there's no Chiyav Kavod. The Ramah says that there is a Chiyav Kavod, but not as much as a father. The Marik that says that there's no Chiyav, he doesn't have to have a Makor. The Marik says Lo Yimatzinu b'shom makom, that he's a Chiyav. And the Ramah says I do have a place. I have a Medrash. Rashi brings it's a Medrash in RESHUS Rabbah. L'maisa the Achronim bring Gemaras, a raya to the Marik that there's no Chiyav to machabed a grandparent. The Gemara in Makis, we'll start with the Gemara in Makis. The Goyim brings this Gemara, a raya to the Marik. The Gemara says in Makis, the Gemara asks a question in the din of Goyal Adam, Tani Chada, Zok the Gemara, Av Shaharag Aben, a father that Rahman al-San kills his son, B'shoigig. Zok the Gemara, Ben Av Shaharag. I'm sorry, Losh Gemara Av Shaharag Haben Nasa Goyal Adam, which Pashtus means if the father Rahman al-San kills a child, a son, a different son could be a Goyal Adam for his brother to kill his father. Yeah. Frek the Gemara V'Tani Idach. That Eina ben Nasa Goyal Adam, that the son does not become a Goyal Adam and he cannot kill his father. As we frek the Gemara, like the Gemara, Loi Kashe, Ha bebnoi, Ha beben bnoi. And our Rashi explains, Ha bebnoi does haste. If a father kills his son, and then there's a brother to the Nerag, he cannot be a Goyal Adam to kill his father. Ha beben benoi, that says the father Rahman al-San killed his son. But who's going to be the Goyal Adam? The grandson. That means the grandson is going to come and be a Goyal Adam for his father to kill his grandfather. That you could. A son can't be a Goyal Adam to kill his father, but a grandson could be a Goyal Adam to kill his grandfather. And what's the chilek? Rashi explains that a grandson is not mechuyev b'chvoid avi aviv and his grandfather. A son is mechuyev b'chvoid aviv, and memela he can't kill his father. He can't be a goyal adam. Mashagin, the grandchild could be a goyal adam. So memela zakta vilna goy, and I have a raya from the Gemara al kapanim with Rashi that he's son of Avad is Kibud Avein, but for a grandchild, there's no Kibud Av, there's no Kibud. What'd say?
Rashi himself says that he is.
The Rashi al Torah. So we're going to get to that. Behemshach the Shiur. We'll go to the Ramaz Raya. The reason I guess I chose this way because Lamaisa, that's a Raya from Medrash, and maybe Ein Lamelim and a Medrash. Let's first see if these more from Shas to bring a Raya. We'll get to that also. Yeah, and a Charami, you're asking that L'chayra, he's a Rashi. Wait a second, he's a Rashi al Torah. Good, we're going to get to that. Be'ez Hashem. So what do we have over here? What'd it say?
Rashi can't be a Rav because Rashi himself says Rashi says there's no Chiyav.
And then he says that there is. It's just not such a Chiyav. Oh.
Then his father's nefesh, it could be part of his father's kibbutz and his father's nefesh from the planet.
What'd it say?
Rashi and Makkos could be not a raya, because his grandfather could be more kibbutz beside his father And if the father's not alive, there's no chiyuv of the grandfather.
Oh, we'll get to that teretz. Very good, very good. That's one of the terutzim. It's not so pashut what you said. We'll get to that in a minute. The first teretz, the tshuva me'ava says that lemaisa. We just said now very clear that avadi mechuyev to be mechabed your grandfather also. The Ramah says you mechuyev to mechabed your grandfather. Taka like the Rashi al Torah. However, it's not as much as a son. A son to a father is more. B'meila, a son, because a son has a more intense din to be mechabed his father, b'meila the son he can't kill his father to be a goyal adam. Ma'ashekin, the grandson, avadli asti mechabed his grandfather. But even being mechabed his grandfather, it's a less of a chiyuv, b'meila could be a goyal adam. That's teretz number one. To say it's not a raya from the Gemara in Makis, we'll see maybe fakert, but it's not a raya. The Gemara in Makis, the reason why the Einikel could be a goyal adam is because he's not as much as a chiyuv. He's not as much as a chiyuv covered as the son. The son has a starker chiyuv to mechaber his father. He can't be a goyal adam. A grandchild, like Rashi says ala Torah, it's not mechayiv as much as a son. But mainly could be a goyal adam. The Yad Avram says a different teretz, and he says, so this teretz is, what we just said now is just that it's not a kasha on the Ramah. The Ramah will say a grandson is not as much as a chiv. The Yad Avram says, I'll pee what it's mevur in Shuvas Reb Kiveger. Reb Kiveger brings from a sefer called Livyas Chaim, that's an einikel of the Bach. The sefer Livyas Chaim says he aside that the chiyuv to machaber a grandfather is only when the father is alive. Medin kibud. Maybe in the next year we'll speak about l'rabas achicha agadol, which that's a lot spoken about. That's the whole yisoid, is because that's a chelik of kibud and meila oni mechayim. But al kapanim zokter kiveger to be machaber a grandfather. Taka like what the Ramah says, you have to mechaber a grandfather, but you only have to mechaber a grandfather, but didn't be mechaber your father. If the father is not alive, then there's no chiv to mechaber a grandfather. So let's go to the Gemara Makkas. We're talking about that the grandfather, Rachman al-Islam, B'shoigi, killed his son. The grandchild, it becomes a goyal adam to kill his grandfather. The KIBUD of his grandfather, but it's only if his father's alive. Over here, his father's not alive. His father was killed. So Memela, it's not a kasha and the Ramah. The Gemara in Makis that says that there's no chiv to mechaber a grandfather is talking about for the grandchild that his father is not alive. Oh, very good, very good. Yitzchak, very good. If you're bringing it up now, I was going to say it later. The Livyas Chaim is tak on Parshas Vayigash. But let's get to it. Be'ez Hashem, Kesidon. I want to go through the rise. Very good. That's mamash when it comes to Meyashiv. Yitzchak was not alive. So taka there was no chiyuv to Machabed Avram. We'll get to that. It's to Sant. It could be there's even a tzad that it's even a bigger chiyuv. So what do we have so far? We have so far two tirutzim to be meyashev the Gemara and Makis, to meyashev the Gemara and Makis. Rabbi say, the third teretz is gar a raya. This Gemara is not a kasha with a teretz under Ramah. It's gar a raya to the shitas Ramah. This Gemara and Makis, be'etzem, is a safri. The Yalkut Shemai brings a safri. You look up, it's a safri. The Safri has a drasha to darshan that a grandchild is the goyal adam to his grandfather. How the Zayas Ranan explains it. I have the Lashon, but the Zayas Ranan explains by Arichas, not the one of the Yalkut Shemai. You have to go to the Zayas Ranan that has the whole Lashon, and the Zayas Ranan explains that the pshat in this Safri that says what a drasha means to Gemara and Makis. In other words, the Gemara and Makis, how does the Gemara and Makis know this din? It's with a drasha. Yeah, a drasha. If you need a drasha to say that the Goyal Adam, the Enikol, could kill his grandfather, Zetzachais, everybody else, Be'etzim is Mechuyev B'Kibud. It's not Pshat, it's a Kash under Ramah. This is Raya, this is from our Sheshiva, Rabbi Chaim Swordlov said it once in a Chumash here. From this Sifri, it's got a Raya to the Ramah. The Ramah says that he's a Chiyuv. That's why you need a drasha to say. Be'etzim went out to drasha, I would say that a grandchild cannot kill his grandfather. He cannot be a Goyal Adam. However, over here, there's a drasha b'Be'elikod. In Kiryas Sefer on the Rambam says this din of Ben Benoy's Mote, the Gemara Makis, and he says the Makor is the Safri. The Makor is the Safri, to say with the drasha. So Atkan we have a Gemara in Makis which would seem that is no Chiyav Kavod, which is a Kash in the Ramah. Lamaisa, we had 3 Terutzim to Miyash of the Ramah. Let's go now to the next Gemara, the Gemara in Soita. The Gemara brings a Maisa. Rabbi Bar Yaakov took care of his grandson, and then when his grandson got older, he asked his grandson to bring him a cup of water. Hashkeni no Ashken Maya, bring me water. So he said, I'm not your son. As I said to Gemara, Lav Bracha, no, I'm not your son. Some have the Girsa in Ein Yaakov when he brings the Gemara. The Girsa is, I'm your grandchild. I'm the son of your daughter. I'm your grandchild. And then I'm not mechuyev. Rashi says over there, I'm not mechuyev to mechabed you. Which l'chayru would seem clearly, pashut pshat in the Gemara, that he wasn't mechuyev to bring a cup of water for his grandfather because he's not mechuyev to mechabed his grandfather. What'd you say? Oh, that's going to be a teretz. Very good. 1 minute. Yeah, could be that. Even the Ramah's maskim. But first, let's see what the raya is. The Goyim brings this raya as well, and the Goyim takas matcha the raya. My time we'll get to in a minute. The Pesach CHIYUV brings this raya. Agav, but wait, before the Agav, so it's klar that you're not mechuyev. You're not mechuyev. The Marsha tak on this Gemara says you're not mechuyev. Done. You're not mechuyev. You're not mechuyev.
His father asked him.
What'd say?
His father also asked him.
What if his father would have asked him, so then he's mechuyev? Stop.
More than his grandfather, so maybe they don't ask him. What's it say?
I have to see the Gemara before. I saw the Gemara, but I think could be he brought him up because he was a Yassim. Maybe he was only Yassim from the mother. I don't know. Agav, you have to understand what's the pshat. Even if there's no chiyuv to mechabed your grandfather, he asked him to bring water. So there's no din. There's no din we're learning now in the shir. There's no din KIBUD avi aviv. But what's pasha pshat? Oh, so these different pshatim taka. These taka different pshatim. The in Torah Sakanois taka Minchas Charevet, the taka say it was a middle learning. Some say that it was kavet Talmud Chacham. He was really Talmud Chacham. It was Einel fi chvoidai. If there would have been a chiv KIBUD av, he would have to. But these two rutzim, they taka explain why he didn't have to. He's a middle learning. Al Kaponim, Pashtas L'chayr is a raya that is no chiyav kavod. On this raya as well, there are multiple tirutzim. Teretz number 1, the Yad Avram says, and the Goyen also, like you mentioned before, very good, that here it was a grandfather, but it was a grandfather through his mother, which would make sense. You would have avona. If you learn the pshat is that it's mitam KIBUD av. So here it's from his mother, but al kaponim, it's only this that the Ramah says Yemochiv lachabad avi aviv. Your grandfather is only your father's father, not your mother's father. And here the Gemara is talking about your mother's father. He actually even brings that the Medrash, the next Medrash after that Medrash in Vayigash, the Medrash says that even though b'nei banim areim kabanim, b'nei banais einam kabanim. And that's even the Gabi, the Etzem, the Shmuz, and Yavamas period of Yerivia. But Akapanim, Dichui number 1, even though the Ramah says that he's a mitzvah to mechabed your grandfather, that's only Avi Aviv, a father's father, not a mother's father. Klar, as Azizok, the Goyen and the Yad Avram.
It might be true, but it's not klar.
What's not klar?
why should it be different? Even if she's a Mechuyv because she's married or whatever, right? Why should that transfer to her kid? She's also theoretically Mechuyv to her father, a lady.
What's the svara?
Let's leave this svara. I hear what you're asking. You're right. You're right. The mother also, you're right. You're right. The mother also has a chiyuv, so the same way it should be kibud after to the mother, to machaber her father. You're right. You're right. You're right. Atkan, what we're saying is a teretz to be meyashiv that the Ramah agrees that for a mother's father, there's no din covered. And we talk after Mavara, what's taka the pshat? But as I state, this is to be meyashiv the Ramah. In Aruch HaShulchan, Tshuva Me'ahava and the Shvus Yaakov all say that if you take a better look in Rashi, Rashi explains that I'm not your son, I'm your grandchild. Zokt Rashi, Ve'ein olai lechabdoch keben. That's the Lashon HaRashi. What does Rashi say? Ve'ein olai lechabdoch keben. Ve'ein olai lechabdoch. Fakert gar. Ve'ein olai lechabdoch keben. But I still have to machabed you. Good. So maybe I have to chabed keben, and I'm oisek with learning or whatever the reason why I didn't do it. But fakert, when Rashi says ve'ein olai lechabdoch keben, would seem fakert, like the Ramah be'etzim, there is a chiyuv to machabed. Narvas, it's not the same darga. Mamash like what the Ramah says. The Ramah says clearly, the Ramah doesn't say that you mechuyev to machabed your grandfather. The Ramah says, El dechayev b'chvoid aviv, more than a grandfather. Avada, we taka here that you also mechuyev to machabed a grandfather. And that's what taka Rashi says. Ein olai lechabed, like a bambi. You still have to be machabed. So just to be masakim, and then we'll go and talk to this Rashi, this Medrash. We'll go try to be mavar a little bit. These are machloikis. The Marik says there's no chiyuv to mechaber a grandfather, not a father's father, not a mother's father. There's no chiyuv kibud b'chlal, and like he says, there's no makoyer anywhere. Maybe even these makoyers and shas, maybe that there is no chiyuv kavod, and when we yashiv, the Ramah says there is a chiyuv kavod. However, the chiyuv kavod is not as much as a chiyuv as a son. What's the makoyer for the Ramah? Again, the Marik doesn't need a makoyer, because the Marik's makoyer, he says, is that there is no makoyer anywhere that is a chiyuv to be machabed. Where does the Ramah come venerally to argue and say that there is a chiyuv kavod? So like we mentioned earlier, Rashi, Rashi says that Yaakov vayizbach lelekei avi Yitzchak, and he didn't say Avram because you're supposed to be machabed your grandfather also, but not as much as your father. First, let's just understand the Rashi for a minute, and then we'll go a little bit into the Protei Havana, let's call it. It's very interesting. Rashi has a kasha. Why didn't Yaakov Avinu mention his grandfather Avram also? As I reflect Rashi. If you look other places, these other psukim that Itaka does mention his grandfather. But why doesn't he mention his grandfather? Zokt Rashi, it's a Medrash, not Mekan, the Avos, you're not Mechuyit Machaber as much a grandfather. Frek the Ramban, I hear you don't have to machabed your grandfather as much as a father. That's taka the din of the Ramah. But still, why taka didn't he mention Bechlal? Why didn't he mention Avram? Why not? Why taka not? As I reflect the Ramban and Rashi. You taka don't have to machabed your grandparents as much as a father. But is that a reason why not to? Why taka not? So over here, Zokt Olivia Schein, and that was in a kuda that somebody was mentioning earlier, Zokt Olivia Schein like this. I'm going to say it to Kitzer, but Emerson, it's a little shverlich because these are later pasuk in Vayechi Taka that he does mention Avram. Also, you have to understand, but he says like this, there's a chilek earlier in the pasuk, the Kei Avi Avram and the Kei Avi Yitzchak, in Perik Lamed Bais, I think it's Pashas Vayishlach. over there, Yitzchak was still alive. Because Yitzchak was still alive, so then there's a chiyuv to be mechabed avi aviv medin aviv, because his father's alive. That's what we brought earlier from Kiveger. Mashenkin over here, because there's no kavod, there's no din kavod, the meilu lo hisker. It is interesting because Rashi is saying that you're not mechuyev like a son. So you have to say that. What does it mean like? But you still have to machabed etvos. Over here he wasn't machabed. The teretz is it's only b'chayav. B'chalal you have to understand because there's a pasuk later that Yaakov did mention Avram also. But al kaponim, the Ramban's kasha was why Taka didn't Yaakov mention Avram Avinu, and the teretz is because over here Yitzchak wasn't alive anymore. Memela, he wasn't here to be. It wasn't a gay anymore to mechabed Yitzchak by mentioning Avram. So we have over here a Makoyer from Rashi from a Medrash with a Clarkite. We have a Makoyer. The Medrash says that a person is mechuyev to mechabed his grandparents, narvos not as much as like a father. So what's the Marik? What does the Marik do with this Rashi, with this Medrash? So Zok the Gilyon Marsha, that over here it's Nemar ein lemeidim en Medrash. Ein lemeidim en Medrash. Zok the Gilyon Marsha. Now the emes is, it's not so pasha. This that ein lemeidim en Medrash, the Mishmur brings in Chelak Aleph, and the emes is there's a Gilyon Reb Kiveger on a Taisus Yomtiv that says the same Yesoid, that you only ein lemeidim in a medrash when there's halacha kenegdai. The Chafetz Chaim says that we don't go with the zoyer if the halacha is keneged the zoyer, and in medrashim also. But if there's no halacha neged, the medrash, you would learn for the medrash. So if the Marik says you're not mechuyev because lo matzinu m'shemakim, if the Marik would have brought a Gemara in Makis, so then then you go with the Gemara Makis, not like the Medrash, but it doesn't bring any Makar. It just says like Matzinu Makar that should be a Chiyuv. But this is all to be B'Yashev the Marik. But you have to understand the Lashon of Marik is he says Lo Matzinu B'Shomakim. What does it mean Lo Matzinu B'Shomakim? These are Medrash, and the emes is that's the Taz's Shaila. The Taz asks on the Marik from the Medrash, from Rashi. The Taz asks on the Marik that these are Rashi, these are Medrash. The Nekudas HaKesev, the Shach asks on the Taz, with what did the Taz discover by asking on the Marik that he's a Medrash? The Ramah himself, if you take a look in Darkei Moshe, the Ramah argues on the Marik because of this Medrash. So what is the Marik? What is the Taz asking on the Marik? What's he asking? What's the Shaila? The Nekudas HaKesev says like this. He says that what the Taz is asking is that Bishleima Medrash, we could understand that the Marik forgot the Medrash, but the Rashi ala Torah, Zokta the Nekudas HaKesev, when a person does Shnai Mikra, the sheet is that Shnai Mikra is actually with Rashi, so it's a Mefurish Rashi. That's how the Nekudas HaKesev, the Shach, is being masber what the Taz of the Shaila is. Avada Taka, these are Medrash, per se, then you can be Miyash of the Medrash, but it's a Rashi. But just to conclude, Mamash, with one Nekuda of this, that the Makor is Rashi. Lamaisa, it's very interesting. We can't leave this part out. Sorry, but we can't. This is Moiridik. Rashi doesn't say you're mechuyev to mechabed your grandfather. Rashi says very agav. Rashi says you're mechuyev to mechabed your father more than your grandfather. Whoever spoke about being mechabed a grandfather? Where's the makor for that? The Achronim asks us Shaila. It's very interesting. It seems like there's a makor somewhere else. Somewhere else there's a makor. Right? Rashi says, the Medrash says, Melamed, not melamed. Mechuyev b'chvoid aviv yosem avi aviv. Whoever said you even mechuyev b'chvoid avi aviv? As we reflect the tshuva me'ava. These two terutzim, one teretz. The Minchas Alaza answers, and he says the following. He says, Chiddush, L'fi what's mevor in the Shibali Aleket, that a person's mechuyev to mechaber his Rebbe's Rebbe, Mechat Hesa. Now he says it's Makal v'chomer, because you and your Rebbe is also mechuyev v'chvoid Rabbi. You the Rabbi mechuyev v'chvoid the Rebbe, similarly mechuyev Makal v'chomer. At Kedei Kach, he says it's deraisa. We never spoke about it up until now if he's a chiv midaraisa or not. It's midaraisa, chiv midaraisa. And Memele, he says the same thing is also with a grandfather, because you and your father are mechuyev in the kibud of your grandfather. So it's makal v'chomer, it's midaraisa. Actually, the Rambam that we mentioned in the beginning of the Shiur, that makalul, a grandfather, is like a random person, that's because even though he's a kal v'chomer, you don't learn kal v'chomer for oynish, in oynshim and adin. But akaban for kibud, he's a kal v'chomer. One more maramokim to say, to chiyiv to be mechaber a grandfather, moiridig in the Welt. The Ramah says he's a chiyiv. We're saying the Makaris from a Rashi, from a Medrash, but the Rashi in the Medrash brings it Agav. And with this I'm going to conclude is that Mogan Avram, the Zayas Saranon, on his Pirish over there in the Safri, the Zayas Saranon says a Moira de Gazach. He says, Ve'efsher toichad varim. I'm just taking out these words. Ve'efsher, the Alfinon me'es avicha, l'rabbi savi aviv. Moira de Gazach, mamash a drosha. Es l'rabes avi aviv, that avi aviv is mechuyev kibud av, you mechuyev ti mechaber avi aviv.
Nachum, it's actually made body with body. So, besides the grandchild and the child.